Hello and welcome to another episode of 0 to 60. On this episode we're fitting a water pump to a 2007 320D BMW. Now these are the early generation of the I think it's an M47, but please correct me if I'm wrong. It's basically the same diesel engine that was in the E46 320D models, and they do run a mechanical water pump. Now, if you're into BMWs, you know the water pumps, the mechanical ones like these, are a common failure point. They're basically the bearings go in the main shaft section, or they can also have issues with the impeller wheel. Now, this car's actually done 220,000 kilometers. It is my mother's vehicle, which is why I've got the pleasure of looking after it. And just on a basic check the other day, we noticed it's getting a little bit of play in that pulley. There's actually a little bit of noise coming from the drive belt, so I'm hoping that it's that's actually a knocking issue. But we're going to crack on and see if we can do it. Now, I've never actually done one of these before, but it looks pretty easy. What I'm going to do, I'm going to jack the car up on the hoist, get the under tray off. Now, the reason I'm going to do that is because we're going to drop a load of coolant when we take the pump off. Then we'll take this shroud off, the engine cover off, and I'll give you an update once we start to get to the juicy parts. Okay guys, so we have the top cover off, the engine cover off, we've got the drip tray underneath ready to go. So this is the where the actual work starts on the water pump. We're going to remove the intake for the turbo first. That is the air filter housing, I suppose you could call it. But yeah, this is the intake pipe, or the inlet pipe for the turbo. So we've just got an E-Torx bit there, and that should pull off the turbo. I'll get that done. So I don't know if you can see that, but the threaded parts that are supposed to be in the airflow meter have actually come out with the bolts. So that's interesting. We'll need to get some pliers onto them and get them removed, but nothing too big of a drama. Okay, so that gives us access to the EGR, which we do need to disconnect. I'll try and get a better camera angle for you guys. Yeah, so we need to disconnect the EGR, the thermostat housing, that pipe there, and we should be getting close. Okay, with the inlet off, the EGR cooler is the next thing to get off. Now it's held on with some Torx bits. We've got one there, two down the back, just on that rear flange there. And other than that, it is also held on with the hose clamp. So I've never actually taken one of these off before. I'm probably gonna try and disconnect it there, that hose clamp there, and those ones at the back. So I'll crack on with that and we'll see how we go. So I got the EGR cooler off. Now it was just those two screws on the flange there, one screw there, and then two screws around the fitting at that end. The hose clamps that actually hold them on, they've got that inner race. So you need to undo the hose clamp and then spread the inner race apart off of that end, and that separates them. It's almost like I'd call it like a mini V-band type clamp, but it does the job. So with access we have now, it's now going to be a matter of undoing that circlip there and the circlip on this radiator hose, and we'll try and get the thermostat off. So something I should have mentioned earlier, I didn't actually block off the turbo. And now as I actually cracked the thermostat off of the water pump, a hell of a lot of coolant has run down. You might have seen in the time lapse, I ended up just blocking to make sure nothing went into the turbo, but if you're doing this properly and you actually care about the car, that sounds terrible, but if you're doing this properly, make sure you do block the turbo when you take the inlet off. Nothing harsh is going to fall in there, but you don't really want water getting in there, or coolant for that matter. But we have the thermostat off. Now it's probably a good idea to replace this when you're doing the water pump, although my mother didn't want to spend the money, so she's going to reuse that one. I mean, it works. We might just have to have a quick look at that rubber seal. It's got a little bit of corrosion on it, but that'll be from the water pump. Yeah, and to separate the thermostat from this plastic pipe, which you might not be able to see, let me just change the angle quickly. Yeah, to separate the thermostat from this pipe here. It was just a matter of wiggling it, and then it popped off. It wasn't too bad, it wasn't seized on, so that was all nice and easy. So we now have access to the water pump bolts, and something I always do is a bit easier. So we can see the water pump there, and we can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 mounting bolts. So let's get them undone. And the water pump's held on with Torx bits. So let's see if they crack all right. Yep. Even though this engine's done 220,000 Ks, never been off before, everything's coming apart quite nicely, which is a nice change from having seized bolts. And just that last bottom bolt, that was much easier to get to with the swivel head extension. Would have been a bit tight without a swivel head. And that should be the water pump coming off. There we have it. Got an plastic impeller. It's not actually, the inside of it's in quite good nick, no corrosion visible. It's just that play. Which is the sign it's on its way out. All right, let's get the new one prepped and ready to go on. Okay, and by get the new one prepped, I mean actually prep the block ready for the new one. Let's get the old gasket off. Hopefully it'll be nice and come off in one piece, not 1,000. Okay, now I do apologise, but I didn't film actually taking this off, but the original BMW gasket, it would appear to be joined to either the timing cover gasket, I think it is, in 3 different spots. So there's 3 little spots on this metal gasket. There's 1 point there, 1 point there, and 1 point down the bottom where it's actually joined to that other gasket, and that needed to be broken away, and I got a bit nervous about that, so I went and just double checked that it was supposed to be pulled off. But we've got the original one off, and something to note that while I'm talking about the gaskets, the OEM BMW gaskets are these metal gaskets, and the aftermarket one is a fibre gasket. Now I think maybe the original E46 versions of these engines, or the early cars, may have had this type of gasket from BMW, and it's the later ones that have switched to the metal. You can buy the metal gaskets on their own. I didn't know they were a thing. We'll try it with the old style. I'm sure it's going to be fine. Like, at the end of the day, the car's getting on a bit, so it's not the end of the world, but hopefully we'll get another couple of years out of it. Yeah, for now I'm just going to get that surface cleaned up, and we'll get the new pump mounted in. So the surface is all cleaned. I wiped with the rag, scraped it with a blade. There wasn't much on it, and then just gave it a final wipe over with brake clean. So we know that surface is all good. I just thought I'd have a quick look at the 2 pumps. Pulley design from the front is slightly different, but side on, we've got the same number of teeth. And, oh, actually, you know what? Let's just get it on a flat surface and just make sure the pulley height is the same, because that is always a concern. Yep. Yeah, they're fine. Pulley height is the same. Yeah, the one that's come off the car, I don't know if I'll be able to pick it up in the video, but it's very loose. I cannot believe it wasn't leaking. I'd say we've caught that just before it actually starts becoming an actual problem, but there we go. The new one, no play in it at all, feels good. Only noticeable difference is the impeller wheel is actually an aluminium wheel, not plastic like it is on the genuine one, which I used to be a bit anti-plastic parts because they normally go hard and brittle, but like that one's, I think Mum's had this car for over 10 years now. And like I said, it's done about 220,000 Ks. That's the original pump, so it does last okay, it's not too bad. All right, let's get this new gasket on and get the pump fitted. So there it is, new one's on, she's all torqued up and good to go. So next in line is the thermostat. Like I said, probably should have thought ahead and actually bought a new one of these. I'll force my mother to buy a new one. But we're going to reuse this one. Yeah, and let's crack on with that. Okay, so we've reconnected the thermostat and both the hoses that go to it. Now it's just a matter of doing the exhaust gas recirculation cooler thingy. That flange there doesn't really look like it could be cleaned. So yeah, we've just got to connect this thing back on, which with its V-bands probably shouldn't be too hard. Okay guys, so EGR cooler's back on, hose clamp's back on, everything's done back up. That's actually the main part of the work done again. We've still got to put the turbo intake pipe on, but I just thought I'd show you that before we do. Look, to be honest, that is a pretty easy job if you're gonna have a tackle doing it yourself DIY. The only tricky things, or things I wasn't really familiar with, were these V-band clampy things on the EGR cooler, but you just poke them away with a flat blade. A little bit of fiddling to get them back on, but they go back on all right. And yeah, that was about it. Oh, and the gasket. The gasket not just coming away easy, it needs to be broke away. But yeah, look, hopefully that helps someone do their water pump on their 320D. Keep in mind, if you don't know what coolant is in your vehicle, make sure you do a full coolant flush and replace it with fresh, correct coolant. We have the same coolants in this vehicle, so I can just top it back up and we're good to go. Yeah, but that's it. Yeah, and that's what I'm going to do now. Go and get the coolant, bleed the system, and start it up. But for the install video, there it is. If you've got any questions about doing this yourself, hit us up in the comments below. And until the next one, peace.